All right, thanks, Andre. Good afternoon. I have a bit of connectivity challenges, so I hope you're going to bear with me. Are you still with me, Andre?
Yes, I'm hoping. I was thinking the connectivity might be on my side, but I can hear you. Yes.
Seems like Haneli could not hear me, so let's hope it was the loss of connection there for a second. So just and they just okay, all good now. Thanks, Haneli. So colleagues, yes, this is our second Auxin for the year, and remember we are keeping with our SoTL linked theme for this year, which asks a very big question of what is a university for. And then today I'm going to introduce my colleagues, André Müller and Olebogeng Mokgantshang, who are going to take us through this question or maybe answer this question through the lenses of academic planning and quality in their presentation of quality culture and curriculum transformation, bridging policy and knowledge practice. So I have a quick bio from my colleagues. So Andre is the director of APQ at SU, and his role is to oversee the operations of the center and liaise with internal and external partners, role players, and stakeholders. And Olebogeng Mokgantshang is the advisor responsible for program leaders and the faculties on curriculum transformation, overseeing the review, redesign, and renewal of existing programs and modules in collaboration with other internal role players to achieve Africanization, decolonization, and restitution. Colleagues, I'm going to hand over to you. You have about 30 minutes, Andre, to make your presentation. Thereafter, we'll have a 15-minute discussion. But colleagues, throughout the conversation, please feel free to ask some, questions that you may possibly forget or the discussion points that you want to pick up on after Andre has spoken. So you can write all of that in the chats function. And then we'll pick up the discussion after Andre and Ole have presented. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Sim. And thank you, colleagues. Welcome to the lunch hour two for the price of one special. I'm going to briefly touch on a few topics. I think Sim and Ole conspired to involve me in this discussion, but the topic is bridging policy and practice in terms of our knowledge practices. And there's a little bit of a spoiler alert that I'm not convinced that we are bridging the gaps between the policy and practice that well. You had some pre-reading to do. I'm not sure whether everybody got the homework assignment, but the one document that we had to look at was the teaching and learning policy. I think we can fake it probably, so we don't have to hang out our dirty laundry. The other document that we wanted you to have a look at was this wonderful poem of Sue McKenna. And maybe I can just briefly read a few lines and so that you get a gist of it. But yeah, it was published in the South African Journal of Science in the preface or the introduction by Leslie Swartz. So yeah, you can see it's an interesting poem with a lot of endnotes and then a lot of references. So while we wait for other colleagues maybe to join, I'll read a few lines. Welcome to the University of Global Excellence. Dear new staff member, congratulations. You are joining a prestigious brand ranked in the top 500 or so. Most of our permanent academics rated working for us to be satisfactory. Student evaluations indicate that our lecturers are 4.5 on a scale of 5. Please ensure that you sign your performance agreement. KPIs are publications. Terms and conditions are not negotiable. Then it goes on with meditations at midday to enhance productivity in afternoon meetings and the division of customer services that actually serve our students, and original work having to be submitted to turn it in for their database. I like the bit about our division of teaching excellence and policy compliance drives throughput in regulation time. Please join their monthly NAFI or Auxin's workshops. NAFI, of course, necessary acronyms for full engagement. The division of quality enhancement, assurance reporting, monitoring and evaluation kindly requests that templates be completed quarterly, and so on, ending with, we are an African university committed to decolonized education. So as a means of introduction, I decided to self-plagiarize a presentation I did recently for a UNISA contingent that or group that came down for a benchmarking visit last month. And I decided, rather than using the stale, dead metaphors of quality, which is a word that Cicero in the 1st century BC translated from Plato, who coined it in Greek, I would rather use the isiXhosa term for our center, and that is called iziko lotwangwisomfundo noqinisekisomgangatho. And the reason why I'm using that is because I think in isiXhosa there's still a little bit more life in the meaning of the words that we attach to a center and the work we do. So iziko is the word for center, but it's also like a fireplace or a hearth. We see a lot of museums also being called iziko. Lotwang, liso is like putting in line. Mfundo is the full word funda is to learn. Fundisa is to teach. So mfundo is education. Mfundis can be teacher or like a missionary or a predikant, a dominee. And then not unesekisum gangato. Imigangato is like floor or levels. And uneseka is to make sure or firm things up. So if we think to the future, SoTL conference, where we have invited Ronald Barnett, the guy in the corner, to talk to us about being a university or what a university is or is for, it's useful to think, if we're talking about Juan Lisa and Munesekisa, what are we putting in line and what are we firming up? If we take some of the writings that Barnett has done and look at the different utopian models for what a university could be, then we realize a university is at the same time, at any given moment, a lot of things simultaneously. It is not as though we have outgrown the initial phases of monks in a monastery or in a mosque copying holy texts. We are still looking for some sort of a truth and meaning, even if that is late night debates or a philosophy lecture. We haven't missed out on the Enlightenment. In the hard sciences, we are still trying to chop things up, analyzing them and classifying them like we've always done, giving them Latin names. We are also almost like a factory that puts through raw material and maybe deliver products, whether they are students that are employable or whether they are little knowledge products that we can put online. The registrar's division works hard at being an efficient administrative bureaucracy. We all have student numbers, and then Innovus typically helps us to make money from spin-off companies. But we also know that the Center for Student Counseling and Development would see our institution more as a therapeutic space for young adults becoming themselves. And for us as lecturers and academic staff members and support staff members, but also students, it's maybe about really working towards some greater self-actualization, being fluid in our different roles, And then as an institution and thinking of institutional learning, it's about us being connected to the world, to South Africa, to the global and the local spaces, working in communities of practice. Why I'm bringing all of this up is because if we're thinking about all the questions about quality assurance and policy and practice, we must ask ourselves all these questions of, but what are we putting in line? What are we firming up? Are we talking about good practices or goodness practices? And as a means of introduction, I'm probably not going to delve too deeply into all of the whys of why quality assurance exists, and I'm not going to touch really on the systems that are at a national level. I'm briefly going to show you the slide of the 6 people, myself included, who work in the Center for Academic Planning and Quality Assurance, but I'm not going to tell you where we are situated or exactly what we're doing. I'm not going to try and figure out what this new reimagined learning teaching enhancement division is. I'm not going to talk about the quality assurance, the quality enhancement spectrum. I'm also not really going to touch on all the departments and all the programs that we work with in terms of when we fit them into a quality assurance cycle. And I might not touch on all the support services and how we think about the quality assurance of their processes, but I would like us to talk about this idea of establishing a quality culture. And in our thinking and our quality assurance and enhancement policy, we really frame it around promoting collective sense-making and reflection. And that's a bit of a white elephant in the room because it's really hard to reflect. We can think with our disciplinary lenses quite easily, but to take a step back and make sense of what it is that we are actually doing and to see the bigger picture of what we're doing, not only in our module, but also how that relates to a program and how that relates to the South African and the global context. That's often quite a difficult exercise to undergo. We have some theories about sense making, and again, I can only touch very briefly on the idea of collective sense making and reflection. Suffice to say that it is social in nature, that people must together try to make sense. It's about who we are as historians and engineers, but also as educational practitioners, teaching and learning and social impact, working in a complicated space. Typically, our sense making relies on looking back at where we've come from and what we've done. It's within spaces that we have control over and can change to some extent. So we can change our curriculum, we can change our pedagogy. It's ongoing. There's never an end point to making sense of what we are busy with. And often it's really the way that we enter conversations and try to make sense. It's looking at different cues that help us to prompt our thinking and maybe take a different stance and look at the lens. And we don't have to be absolutely accurate when we're reflecting and thinking about who we are and where we're going and what we're doing. It's rather thinking of how can we change the status quo and move more to where we would like to go to. So if we were just to touch on focusing on and by extracted cues, there are many things that we can use as entry points. We've seen threshold concepts being quite popular in terms of what are those key things that people must grasp. We've seen decoloniality, we've seen graduate attributes, parity of student success. But with all of this sense making happening in our own individual minds, there's a lot of things that can go awry because we all work with biases. So I'm handing over to Olebogeng. So Olebogeng, if you can switch on your sound and take over some of the reflective questions, then over to you.
Thank you, Müller. So as we continue this conversation,
around building a quality culture and curriculum transformation, I invite everybody to reflect around these questions. What informs knowledge selection? What are the mechanisms for that informs knowledge selection? And how explicit or how visible are these is your criteria for knowledge selection to your students? Do your students know and understand the criteria that you use to select knowledge? And lastly, how has the institutional policy landscape on teaching, learning, and assessment informed your knowledge selection? These are very important questions as we continue this conversation around curriculum transformation, quality culture, collective sense making. And I hope that I will be able to give a few of you some moment in this later in this conversation to share their insights and their practices in relation to this as we try to together build this bridge between policy and our practices.
Okay, for some odd reason, Ole, you can continue.
Yes, yeah. And these questions and part of this conversation is informed by my observation as an advisor for curriculum transformation in the university. As you might have seen in the poem and as André has presented, when people see quality assurance, they see these people who come with templates, module specification forms, well known as Form B, program specification form, well known as Form A, and so on and so forth. So part of my role is to sit down and read submissions, either in relation to new programs, though a colleague of ours, Melissa, I see she's present, deals with the new programs mostly, but with the review of existing programs as well as with book submissions. Book submissions. I have realized that compliance is very important for the role players in the institution. It is very much important for them, for us as academics and support staff in the institution. Whether we say to people, a Form B is actually an outcome or an output of the curriculating process of curriculum drawing. Forget the Form B, do the curriculum and transfer later into the Form B. The Form B always takes the forefront. The second issue is that I've observed is that precedence matters more than principle. When you read a submission and you give advice, you give feedback, you get questions like, can you please show me an example of any other department that has done this before? Stuff like that. It is important. The principle that underpins the advice and the advice itself seem to be taken, but it is taken on condition that I have seen this happening somewhere. And lastly, the structuring mechanisms of knowledge are implicit, and maybe we'll talk about that later as we reflect on the questions that we have provided to you. However, they are very implicit. We have a curriculum, a teaching and learning policy that does not define the curriculum. However, it makes some promises. For example, the most important that I needed to highlight for the purpose of this conversation is 7.2.2, which says academic programs and modules are continuously renewed to be fit for purpose, considering decoloniality, indigenous knowledge systems, and a multilingual and multicultural mindset, whilst also foregrounding the SU graduate attributes. So if you read the first part of this promise, and you think about some of the implicit mechanisms like the restitution statement that says Stellenbosch University commits itself to unconditionally to the ideal of an inclusive world-class university in and for Africa. Actually, when I was reading the Sue McKenna poem, I paused at some point to think, was she really writing this poem about Stellenbosch University? Because most of these things that they are talking about in the poem are what we see on a daily basis. So how do we live up to this promise of continuously reviewing programs to be fit for purpose, decoloniality, indigenous knowledge systems, when the structural mechanisms of knowledge are so implicit? I suspect that this could be one of the challenges that academics and support staff are facing in their respective roles.
Yeah, so I think as we move towards a quality culture and promoting collective sense making and reflection, it's really important to figure out whether we are just paying lip service to the policies or whether in fact we are driven more by our the things that must be done for approval purposes, not necessarily the why that underpins it. Olebogeng, back to you.
Yes. So basically, after all these observations and experiences and all this bigger picture that we are talking about, much as the teaching and learning policy and other documents that regulate teaching and learning do not define the curriculum, the structuring mechanisms of knowledge remain implicit, like I've argued, but this has got significant epistemological, pedagogical, and social justice implications. It is not. It is an open for all. Everybody can think and do whatever they want because the structural mechanisms are not well defined. However, the fact that we don't specify these structural mechanisms does not remove structure. Structures just become invisible, and cumulative knowledge is disrupted. And we always have these conversations about, especially when we review interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary programs in the institution. We, at some point, are just calling them interdisciplinary when everyone is just in their corner doing their own thing, going against the whole idea of interdisciplinarity. And student-centeredness is always sold and confuses agency with the absence of structure, because real agency requires engagement with structured knowledge. A lot of literature around what is the university for reminds us that, for example, Paul Eshwin says that the role of the curriculum is to bring students in a university into a transformative relationship with knowledge. So real agency requires engagement with structured knowledge, but this does not only refer to students. It also refers to academics and everybody else in the institution, that whatever we do, the underpinning principles, there must be engagement with structured knowledge, which is something that sometimes is not so evident. So as I move towards a conclusion of how do we bridge between policy and practice, especially for quality assurance and curriculum transformation. we need to move away from a mentality of tick box exercises. If I have completed the Form B in this way, and submit it to APQ, we'll get feedback, fix it, and we move on. If we can sit down and substantively engage with issues and engage with knowledge in our curriculum processes, that is going to be important. And if we can integrate policy with a clear transformation mandate, because currently there seems to be implicit mechanisms in that regard, and also collaborations of structures and powerful actors. We need to see powerful actors taking the lead of this transformation enterprise. And this work requires adoption of a critically conscious approaches. And critical consciousness calls for us to sit down and think about the most important question. What is a university for? As an academic, in order for the university to live up to what it is for, what is it that I'm supposed to do? And am I doing what I'm supposed to do? Stuff like that. At the end of the day, the curriculum is a real structured mechanism of knowledge. Leaving it undefined does not remove power, it hides it. At any point in time, the curriculum is a center of power in politics. So whether we try to be implicit about that, it does not take that away. The curriculum is a center of power in politics, and these implicit structural mechanisms of knowledge could lead to more injustices, though we had committed to deal with the injustices of the past. André.
Thank you, Olebogeng. So I know that we want to spend some time on the questions that you've asked in an earlier slide. So we'll get back to it. I'm just going to quickly run through a few more slides, and then I think I can minimize my presentation, and we can go back to those questions and then open it up for the floor. But maybe just further to then how we try to do our work, to some extent, the ideas that are maybe embedded in different policy documents, let's say learning-centered teaching and learning, engaged scholarship, some of the transformation objectives. When we go in with a template or with a self-evaluation process, we often use those templates that you must complete and the processes that you must go through as a Trojan horse to try and infuse the conversation with some of these key elements that are of really strategic importance to the university. I've got a colleague from Mauritius who says that quality in the end is like tomatoes. You have to mix it into every sauce. It's not something that is separate by itself. You have to glitz it in, and that's how you dish it up. But we also do find that many people see our quality assurance space, the forms, the paperwork, just as a total bureaucratic exercise, a Kafka's Castile, where you cannot make kop of start out what you're supposed to do, and you just complete it, copy and paste, and try to get it over and done with. But yeah, you could also use these processes, the quality assurance mechanisms. If you're, let's say, a dean, you can use it as a carrot and a stick. You can sometimes really figure out what are the chunky, spicy tomato sauce that will work well in one situation, and what is the smooth tomato sauce in another. So horses for courses, not one solution. When we step back as well and we think about quality assurance over the ages, obviously it's not just about templates and procedures. We have established over 100 odd years that Stellenbosch has existed a way of moderating, a way of peer reviewing, a way of peer evaluating lectures, a way of figuring out what makes for good teaching and what makes for good learning. But a lot of these things that we put in place have also evolved from the actual industrial model, where Henry Ford in 1920 just streamlined the processes for putting the kariki together. And if you look at the Ngram viewer, you can see that the whole idea of quality control, having all the different steps at the right place, that can become quite technocratic and mechanistic. And we see that quality is also not just with the CHE or with our office, but with different professional bodies. And as we move on now with a new strategy plan 2026 and 2030, I think part of the challenge is to really read all of the strategic documents to figure out how to draw these into our 10 faculties and the programs and courses we do. So I'm going to basically stop there. There are more slides that we could have talked about. We could have talked about sense making in terms of different approaches. Do we want to interpret the curriculum, or do we want to have a critical realist lens? When we talk about being learning centered, I think it's important to realize that we have different epistemological approaches in the harder sciences as to the softer sciences. So at the same time, again, almost the way that the university is a lot of things at the same time, we know that students are still driven by the fear of failure. So behaviorist learning theories still apply. We know that students are easily distracted with cell phones, so cognition and metacognition learning theories apply. In the teaching and learning space, we are often we enjoy the social constructivist learning theories, but as we move to a post-human world, maybe it's also the connectivist theories that could apply. So when we're thinking about different kinds of learning theories, it should inform our curriculum structure as well. And for example, if we are not explicit about how and what we are putting into the curriculum, then there might be a part of the university, let's say the entrepreneurial part, that would like to take knowledge and repackage it as micro-credentials and put it on the internet, make a lot of money. And that could be tricky in an era of identity politics as well, where maybe if you've got a frame of reference where science is universal and true, and you've got a social science theory that presupposes some sort of identity politics type of a view, then if you're in this therapeutic space of self-actualization, that could also be quite tricky if you're not explicit about what it is that you are doing. So I'm going to now move out of the PowerPoint presentation and then try to find the slide with the questions again. I think the focus for us could well be on the parity of success and student engagement and social justice along with transformation. But for now, I'm just going to exit the presentation and then move to your slide, Olebogeng. And then Sim, I think we're going to give it back to you to help us facilitate the discussion going forward and open the floor for people to really now try to answer the question of what is informing our mechanisms for structuring knowledge. What is this curriculum thing that we put together, and what informs all of our decisions around that?
Yeah.
So over to you, Sim, and back to Ole as well.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you so much, Ole and Andre, for this presentation. I think it's one that every faculty should actually have think more deeply about some of the, well, I think all of the things that you have, or the points that you have mentioned. You know, I was taking notes as you are talking, and there were back-to-back points that you were mentioning, and it does take us to the point of really what is a university for. And I like the presentation where you showed, and I think we have spoken about this when we are looking at what is really quality and how see it as a stick, or as a carrot. And like you said, when can deans you know, use it also as a stick and a carrot? And it's just sometimes also based on where we are drawing our ways of knowing and being at university. So yeah, colleagues, there are the questions on the screen, and I think we can open this moment as a time of reflection on everything that André and Ole have spoken about, but also the questions that are put up on the slide. Anyone who wants to jump in?
Yes,
Alison.
oh, there's a hand.
Yes, Alison, you can go.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Andre and Ole. I just wanted to go back about the question about what is quality actually about. And I think that is a very, very important question to ask, because it frames what we view as what is quality higher education, and what perhaps is not. But I think we need to think carefully about, why do we have quality in higher education? And thinking about the question that you asked up front, Andre, about bridging the policy and practice gap, I think that is important. So quality in the South African higher education context is used together with funding and together with planning as mechanisms for moving higher education away from its apartheid past. So it's a mechanism for transforming higher education. And if we think about Form Bs and Form As in that context, if we think about the Council on Higher Education's conception of curriculum specifically, it doesn't just look at curriculum as a list of subjects and topics and resources that are included in a course of study. It's about who is taught, what is taught, how knowledge is, how learning is assessed. It's about our ways of knowing. It's about our values and our practices. It's about our teaching methodologies. It is about our assessment practices. It also talks about hidden curriculum and what is unofficial and what is unintended lessons that are learned as part of curriculum. So if we think about Form Bs and Form As in the context of what the CHE says or argues curriculum is, then we can't just look at Form Bs and Form As as a tick box exercise, because it asks us to apply ourselves more deeply in answering those kinds of questions about, who am I as a teacher? Who is in my class? What is it that I value as knowledge in my subject area, etc., etc.? And how do I want students to be able to demonstrate those knowledges? And perhaps that way, if we think of those kinds of questions, I think it's a way to bridge the policy practice gap. Thanks.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Alison. Ole, did you want to say something?
Well, there was another hand, and I don't know what happened. There was another voice from APQ anyway. Yeah, just to say, given what we have been saying, we are also cognizant of the paradox of quality assurance in the higher education space. Much as we are pushing for this substantive engagement and the thinking about the generative mechanisms for knowledge, and as Alison has put it so well, that who are we and who's in our classroom and stuff like that, we are also those people that are still going to look into the processes of Form A's and Form B's and give feedback, and sometimes that is not welcome. So yeah, there's a bit of a paradoxical nature of our existence in this space.
Mm.
I think, Karen, you also had your hand raised. Karen Wolf.
You were very quick on the uptake there. I was going to say, I can't talk now because I'm in an open office, but yes, I had my hand raised. I was just going to say, I'm really delighted to see the more sensitive and responsive awareness of what we mean by kinds of knowledge, particularly in light of, and I don't know if Sim has shared this with you yet, but we had Chrissy Bowie last week at the National Extended Curriculum Program Symposium, where for the first time, Chrissy made people aware of that even our approaches to structuring so-called extended curricular programs are in response to kinds of knowledge, different kinds of support and learning strategies need to be responsive to the epistemological and ontological and praxis orientations of a knowledge area within a larger program and qualification. So it was just to say that many of the quality mechanisms we use feel like they're at a disjuncture. When you started and used the word quality, I said to my colleagues who are sitting around me, I hate this word quality, you know this. But it needs to be part of a kind of an ecosystem of how we see what it is we do. So it was just to say, well done. It was great.
Yes, indeed, Karen. It was really interesting to hear how she showed the people in the room. And I think she also kind of showed us how we could work around the curriculum to introduce new ways of thinking and understanding society, I guess, and our students.
I think, Karen, as well, I try to allude to this idea that quality has become a dead metaphor. It is a word that is almost as vacuous as excellence. But if you try and do an exercise, let's say with ChatGPT, where you ask ChatGPT to translate the word quality into all of the top languages in the SADC region and then translate it back in plain English, it was interesting to me that you get to another word, and that word is goodness. And we are very fond of talking about best practices and good practices in quality assurance, but I think to move towards goodness practices could be something that helps us to reframe what the questions are that we should be asking ourselves about why we are doing things, what we are doing, and how we can do it differently. And that's maybe just the quality assurance project, is that it's trying to think scholarly about your actual practice. And I think the challenge is that we are often caught within our disciplines, and those disciplines lend themselves to modules, and those modules are then quite often a different animal to the programs in which they are embedded. So we don't often step out of that, and out of our own epistemological framing and our own biases and our own ontologies, into a space that recognizes that students taking chemistry might not want to become chemistry professors one day. They might just be taking this little module as part of another identity that they're cultivating. And to then think, well, how am I prejudicing or privileging certain knowledges because of my framing of what a chemistry module should be like, or a history module, or a philosophy module? What am I choosing to include? Am I teaching history by touching on the Roman Empire, the Egyptians, and taking those ages? Or am I asking students to interact with their grandparents and get their real stories? What are those choices? And do we sit around the table and discuss these reasons for making these choices? Because quite often when we then enter the conversation, and Olebogeng is the advisor curriculum transformation, they look to us to provide the answer for the deep thinking that should happen in their space. So yeah, that I think that is part of the trickiness of it all. But I think goodness practices might just be a good idea. Karen, I see you would like to respond, and then Ole, you're open
Yes.
to interject as well.
I just wanted to say that one of the biggest failures in our entire system is this module focus. And, it's like in this huge complexity where we should be seeing at, yes, micro, meso, macro levels, our processes, our Form Bs, for example, have no relationship to anything else happening in a program. We haven't taken, and we talk about curriculum renewal as, let's say, program, institution, bigger, wide. And yet all of our documentation is so focused on one particular thing called a module. And that's just a little part of it. And I think it's because we're trying to protect academics and make them feel safe that, okay, this is your domain. But it does not exist independently of the whole, and a very complex whole. So I want to encourage, André, your division to think about how to enable staff to connect those dots, especially if you're going to implement something systemically. That makes these processes better, that makes us achieve the goodness that you want us to achieve. Just say.
Noted. Ole, would you like to give us some parting words?
Yeah, no, I'm quite comfortable. I'm just disappointed that we did not get views from faculties, especially lecturers, talking to us about reflecting about these questions and us getting to engage with them. However, as Sim has mentioned, this conversation ought to continue. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, colleagues. Actually trying to find my notes on to quickly maybe respond to the points on the slide. And like you said, Ole, on the first question, I wrote that I'm sorry, I've covered my screen now, so I'm looking only at the notes. So you did mention that precedence is, the what people draw from. And I think perhaps that is safer because no one wants to start something they are not quite sure about, because this is a process. It's new perhaps to people, and people want to be safe. And I think those are reflections that I've had from academics. And when the second question about exposing the knowledge ways to students is the risk that it also perhaps it could expose that individual when they start having these conversations with students, because you can't guarantee where the conversation is going to go and how perhaps you will be able to control it, because I think there's many experiences, especially in this university, where students have actually harmed academics who are trying to do good. So perhaps we also need to talk about the guaranteed protection and responses of the university when it comes to these conversations. And maybe that is something that we need to discuss at maybe another time. And about the policies, I always feel like policies assume a neutral stance or position. It's always as if, things go like that and then that is it. And maybe if we can also be open about how policies do not look at the challenges and implementation of what they're talking about. Those are some of the considerations that perhaps we need to look at, and how academics can maneuver around this very contentious issue of curriculum transformation. I don't know if I make sense.
Indeed, you make sense. But that's exactly part of our argument, to say there's going to be a movement from practices, and there's also going to be a movement from a policy point. Because if we adopt a precedence type of approach, we are going to find out there's a culture of complying with documents SR and not a level of critique towards them. And that is why I talked about a critically conscious approach to this. So we are going to move from policy, and we are going to move also from practices, and there's going to be a midpoint. And that is how we could bridge between policy and practice, because this neutrality and this implicitness of certain things does not really work for us.
Yeah.
So you're indeed.
So I think in my notes, when I take a quick glance at it, some of the points that André touched on, and I think you did as well, it is the collective sense making and reflection that perhaps needs to happen from your or APQ and DLTE, I guess, from a sense. So we know that when we look at a Form B and is it a module description or program description form, it is not entirely about completing the form, but it is about the openness and the thinking. And I think we need to allow and make more spaces of thinking and talking than being, approached with a form and a deadline that says the form needs to be in by, a specific time, because that process alone kills the collective sense making. And then that's where collaboration of the structures also come in, because like André, you said, at some point, program renewal and quality assurance for, I think I saw Ada in the room as a Vice Dean Teaching and Learning. She has, unfortunately, I'll call it a box to tick that is, pressuring her, like we said, from the powers that may be. And you understand, we need to also understand those pressures and processes from the